Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to the muddied, torchlit alleys of medieval Paris, where the food is bland, the streets are blurrier than you'd like, and the shoes, well, the shoes could poke your eye out. That's not a joke. These things are so long, they make clown shoes look humble. You're about to learn how a trend started as a fashion flex and ended up on a royal banned list. Because, yes, a French king once said, "Enough pointy shoes. This is madness." Picture it. The year is 1368, and Paris is a city of timbered houses, flickering lanterns, and aromas that make you wish your nose had an off switch. You trudge along the cobbled streets, dodging chamber pot runoff and fish guts, when suddenly you hear the distinct clap clap scrape of someone approaching. You turn, and here he comes, a man with shoes so long and narrow they stretch 6 inches past his toes and bend upward like a ski ramp, on purpose. You might think, surely that's ceremonial, right? Nope. These are everyday poulains. They're called that because the style wandered over from Poland. Poulain basically means in the Polish style, and French nobility ate it up like over-salted turnip stew. The longer the toe, the higher your social rank. Some noblemen strutted around with 10-inch extensions, hobbling up castle steps like stilt walkers who missed circus school. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. That's always fun. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The streets of Paris whisper with soft footfalls, well, more like toe drags, and it's clear something's happening. The pointed shoe craze hasn't just caught on, it's become contagious. Across every quartier, from knights to bakers, people are trading in their rounded toe boots for long, exaggerated poulains. In fact, this is one of the first times in French fashion that footwear becomes a full-blown cultural spectacle. You walk into a tavern half timbered and candlelit. The floor is straw strewn, and the conversation is dominated by one question: how long is too long? A smith complains that he had to reforge his iron stirrups just to accommodate his son's ridiculous shoes. A merchant boasts about getting a cobbler in Rouen to craft a pair so extended they have hinges in the middle. You blink slowly, imagining trying to sprint away from an angry goose in those things. Spoiler, you wouldn't survive. Historians still argue whether the poulain trend was genuinely admired or just tolerated out of social pressure. Some say it was about silhouette. The elongated look made men appear taller and more elegant. Others think it was a literal foot race of wealth. The longer the leather, the richer you must be. And it wasn't just the nobility. Sure, dukes and counts rocked silk poulains with gold stitching, but even lower-ranking clerks and traders tried to get in on the toe-extending action, which meant a lot of twisted ankles and snickers and church pews. What's quietly amusing here is that France in the 1360s wasn't exactly thriving. There were famines, political squabbles, and a little event called the 100 Years' War in the background, but somehow the biggest scandal in certain court circles was whether a young viscount had his poulains cut diagonally or curved like a snail shell. Imagine needing a valet not just to dress you, but to lift your shoe tips before you sit. It's fashion theater at its finest and most absurd. Of course, some folks tried to take this seriously. A few cobblers began patenting toe supports made of whalebone or wicker. Yes, wicker. Your shoes now match your picnic basket. There were even attempts to make decorative sheaths to cover the extra toe in rainy weather. Were they waterproof? Number, did they help? Also number. You make your way to a merchant's stall where poulains are stacked in rows, their noses sticking out like quills from a porcupine. Colors range from saffron to indigo with dyed fur trims and tiny bells sewn into the tips. One particularly gaudy pair has a miniature lion embroidered just before the toe bends up. It's impractical. It's decadent. It's absurdly fabulous. The irony, of course, is that none of this makes walking easier. The longer the shoe, the more awkward your stride. And the more awkward your stride, the more likely you'll trip over your own prestige. But in a world where your status is worn on your body, your sleeves, your codpiece, your headgear, well, of course, it had to show up on your toes too. And yet, something about it feels familiar. Maybe it's the way modern fashion still embraces the impractical. Sky high heels, jeans so tight you can't sit, sunglasses too wide for your face. A quiet reminder that looking ridiculous for social capital might be the most timeless tradition of all. The Pouline, in all its exaggerated glory, is here to stay for now. You're still wandering through the cramped and candlelit world of medieval Paris, but now the energy has shifted. The pointy shoes aren't just a passing curiosity, they've become a quiet battlefield. Behind closed doors and smoky halls and tiled chapels, murmurs are starting to rise. Not everyone is amused by these absurdly long toes, and some are downright livid, especially the clergy. You stop outside a stone church, its heavy wooden doors half open. Inside, a bishop is giving a sermon, not about sin or salvation, but about footwear. Specifically, how it's all going to hell in a toe-shaped handbasket. He points to the choir boys, forced to wear poulains so long they can't genuflect without help. Parishioners snort softly as the bishop sputters, "These shoes are the devil's prong." Historians still argue whether the church's opposition was truly about morality or just annoyance. Some claim clergy saw the Poulines as vanity incarnate, a symbol of worldly corruption. Others think they were just fed up with aristocrats tripping into altars. Either way, church leaders started petitioning for reforms, not to stop war or famine. No, they wanted to shorten shoes. You duck into a nearby convent garden where a nun is tending lavender with quiet precision. She mutters under her breath about the absurdity of men who can't kneel, can't pray, can't even walk across wet grass without dragging their honor behind them like a wet sock. God gave us feet, she sighs, snipping a stem. He didn't mean for them to be 12 inches long. Soon, you begin to hear rumblings at court. King Charles V, yes, that Charles, known as the Wise, though probably not for his shoe opinions, starts grumbling about the state of fashion. He's busy trying to stabilize France after years of war and pestilence, and meanwhile, his nobles are spending fortunes on toe embellishments and tripping into diplomatic meetings. This is where things start to tighten. In 1368, a royal edict is issued, quietly at first. It restricts the toe length of shoes to a modest 2 inches, a full-scale pointy shoe crackdown, and that's where you find yourself now, standing outside a cobbler's workshop as the news spreads. The door slams open, and a disgruntled noble shouts, "What am I, a peasant?" 2 inches? The cobbler, already trimming down a display pair, just shrugs. Tell it to the king. In truth, enforcing the law was a mess. Who's measuring the toes? What counts as a curve versus a point? And can someone with very large feet claim proportionality? You duck into the workshop to observe. It smells of tallow and leather, and there's a growing pile of discarded shoe tips on the floor. They look like sad little horns, severed from their peacock hosts. A boy collects them in a sack, no one knows why, probably planning to sell them as cat toys. The king's decree sparks chaos. Nobles feel insulted, cobblers panic, and courtiers quietly compete to find ways around it. One count allegedly added detachable toes so he could appear compliant during the day and fashionable at parties. Another noble supposedly commissioned poulaines with collapsible tips, though historians still debate whether these were real or just the medieval version of satire. What's certain is that pointy shoes had become more than a trend. They were a symbol of power, of identity, and of resistance. The more the king tried to ban them, the more people found ways to keep them alive. Meanwhile, peasants, as usual, watched this unfold with the sort of bemused distance only people trying to survive can afford. Let them fight over shoehorns, one farmer mutters as he trudges past you barefoot. But the king wasn't entirely out of line. There were legitimate concerns. Poulain had been blamed for several minor injuries, including a fire in Lyon where a man knocked over a lantern with his toe. Another report mentions a knight being unable to mount his horse properly, leading to what's described as a highly undignified dismount. You can fill in the rest. There's also the hygiene issue. Long shoes trapped more mud, more debris, and let's just say there weren't exactly medieval shoe cleaning stations on every corner. Several towns began placing straw mats near church entrances, not for reverence, but so people could wipe their poulains before they left a trail of gunk behind them. The backlash grew. Slowly, sure, but steadily, and yet not everyone obeyed. You see a young courtier walking past, strutting in defiant 4-inch poulains dyed a dazzling teal. He knows the risk. A fine, maybe even public shaming. But fashion, like love and poorly cooked goose, often defies reason. He nods at you with that smug confidence only someone in very uncomfortable shoes can project. In that moment, you understand the tension. This wasn't just about fashion, it was about freedom, or at least the illusion of it. A small rebellion curled into a toe. You're moving now through the echoing stone corridors of royal bureaucracy, where the business of banning shoes has become surprisingly complex. You can almost hear the scribes groaning as they scratch out yet another royal ordinance, this one specifying the precise number of inches noblemen may legally flaunt on their feet. By now, it's not just King Charles V who's on an anti-Poulain crusade. His successor, Charles VI, often called Charles the Mad, though that nickname probably says more about the press of the 1490s than his actual state, picks up the mantle. You imagine him pacing in his chamber, one slippered foot poking out from a robe, muttering, "We can't have diplomats impaling each other at banquets. Enough with the shoes." His advisors likely nod, not because they agree, but because it's safer than pointing out that the king has recently mistaken his reflection for a spy. Still, laws are issued, new limits are announced. This time the language is stricter. No pointy shoes longer than 2 fingers' breadth beyond the toes. That's right, medieval France is now regulating fashion by finger length. Somewhere, a tailor starts quietly crafting gloves for feet. You step into a tailor's studio. It smells of wool, beeswax, and faint desperation. A nobleman stands on a platform, arms out, getting fitted for a doublet, while whispering to the seamstress, "Make the toes look shorter when I stand still, but longer when I walk." She doesn't even blink. "Of course, my lord, illusions are extra." This is where the workarounds begin to shine. While the monarchy tightens restrictions, nobles get more creative. Some stuff the tips of their shoes with moss or even straw to keep them aloft. Others add little chains that run from the shoe tips to the knee like delicate pointy parachutes. These aren't fashion choices, they're statements of defiance, of absurdity, of "you're not the boss of my feet." Historians still argue whether this era saw more fashion innovation out of necessity or rebellion. Probably both. The pointy shoe becomes an arms race, every inch an escalation. You wouldn't be surprised if somewhere, hidden deep in a noble's vault, there's a pair of poulaines so long they had to be folded in half for storage. And the enforcement? A joke. Royal guards tasked with measuring shoes carried wooden rulers and an eternal sense of shame. Most preferred to look the other way. Some were even bribed with pastries. After all, how threatening can a man in a fur-lined hat holding a pie really be? Still, the rules existed, and for every scofflaw, there was someone willing to snitch. You overhear a whispered conversation between two court ladies. One tuts, "Did you see the Duke of Anjou last night? Practically stabbed the minstrel in the thigh." The other sips her wine. It's always the quiet ones with the loudest feet. Meanwhile, outside the court, pointy shoes take on new meaning. Among the rising merchant class, poulaines become a status marker. The longer the toe, the more coin in your pocket, supposedly. You stroll past a cobbler shop in Lyon with a sign that reads, "Two new styles, humble merchant, 2 inches, and prosperous pretender, 5 inches." You can't help but chuckle. This isn't just about vanity, it's about climbing the social ladder, one exaggerated shoe at a time. Of course, not everyone's thrilled. Doctors begin issuing pamphlets, handwritten scrolls, warning about poulain toe, a condition involving crushed digits and permanent arch damage. The treatments include foot rubs with vinegar, long soaks in warm urine, medieval medicine, never boring, and if all else fails, amputation. Suddenly, a nice soft slipper sounds divine. You visit a healer's hut. Inside, a man lies on a low cot, his right foot bandaged, his shoe resting in shame beside him. 12 inches, he mutters. Should have stopped at 10. The healer applies a salve that smells like old cabbage. You're lucky it didn't rain, she says. You'd have slipped, and I'd be sewing your nose back on. Fashion always has casualties, but the poulain's body count is more comical than tragic. One jester reportedly used a noble's shoe as a makeshift trumpet. Another story tells of a bride tripping on her own toes and falling headfirst into the wedding cake. True, maybe. Embellished? Definitely. But delightful either way. What's clear now is this. The more they tried to suppress the shoes, the more popular they became. Because they weren't just about looks anymore. They were about mischief, identity, satire, and that's where you find yourself in the midst of a paradox, a kingdom trying to reign in its own ridiculousness, while that very absurdity becomes its calling card. Even now, centuries later, you picture a noble ghost haunting the halls of Versailles, his spirit doomed to eternally glide through the corridors, unable to pass through doors without turning sideways. You're outside now, in the slush of a medieval Parisian street, dodging chickens and sidestepping puddles that might be water, wine, or something less poetic. The sound of clacking wooden soles echoes between crooked timbered buildings, and as you look down, you spot the source, yet another set of poulains navigating their own treacherous journey. This section of the story belongs to the people, because once pointy shoes trickle down from courtly circles into the muddy alleys of common life, all bets are off. While kings issue bans and nobles play footsie with rebellion, the average Parisian sees poulains as something else entirely. Hilarious, satirical, an opportunity to poke fun at the folks upstairs. You stop by a small outdoor puppet show. The main act? Sir Toe-a-Lot, a long-nosed noble whose shoe tips curve skyward until they bonk him in the face every time he bows. The crowd roars with laughter. A baker's apprentice tosses a crust of bread at the puppet. Watch your step, my lord. And just like that, the poulain becomes comedy. Among tradespeople, shoes start getting absurd on purpose. A butcher wears poulains shaped like pig snouts. A brewer opts for tips that curl into little tankards. Historians still argue whether this was sincere imitation or social satire masquerading as fashion. Either way, it's proof that when the elite zig, the masses will zag with flair. But then something unexpected happens: practicality. You visit a cobbler in Rouen who's concocted a new kind of poulain, shorter, reinforced, made for weather and movement, but still stylish enough to turn heads at Sunday Mass. He calls them petit poulains, and they catch on fast. Women, too, begin reshaping the trend. Picture a merchant's daughter in a plum-colored gown, her poulains modestly curled, just enough to show she's fashionable, but not frivolous. She lifts her hem as she steps over a puddle, and you see it, a tiny embroidered rose at the toe. No longer just a man's obsession, the shoe becomes a quiet form of feminine expression. It's also a minefield of etiquette. You overhear one dinner host chiding his guest. "I'm sorry, your shoes must remain outside. We recently lost a cat." Everyone chuckles, but the rule is real. Poulain etiquette becomes part of court manuals. Don't point them at elders, don't trip the clergy, don't wear longer toes than your host unless you're planning a duel. And duels do happen. Well, sort of. One record, admittedly shaky, tells of a minor nobleman in Burgundy challenging another to a toe duel. They met at dawn, stood 12 feet apart, and slowly shuffled toward one another. Poulains raised like fencing foils. The contest ended when one tripped over a goose. Still, the honor was considered defended. By this point, tailors and cobblers are doing brisk business. You stop in a shoemaker's tent at a traveling fair and watch him shape raw leather over a wooden last. He hums a hymn while threading golden cord through the tip, curling it just so. This isn't just commerce, it's art. Shoes now come with accessories, decorative chains, tiny bells, even scented sachets tied to the inside of the tip, because nothing says romance like sandalwood scented footwear. But not everyone's amused. Preachers begin including footwear in their sermons. You duck into a small stone chapel and hear a monk thunder, "Pride is the devil's poulain." The congregation stares at their feet. One woman discreetly unlaces hers, and then, beyond Paris, across the Channel, the trend takes a ship. In England, poulain hit the court of Richard II like a stiletto to the shin. English nobles already have a flair for excessive fashion. This is the kingdom where fur-lined sleeves can be wide enough to shelter small mammals, but now their toes curve like swan necks. Sumptuary laws appear again. You glance at one parchment and read, "Yeomen may wear 1 inch beyond the foot, knights 2, dukes and above, as long as they wish, but not exceeding the length of a forearm. Because when in doubt, legislate by limb." But like in France, enforcement is a joke. One town crier in York is overheard saying, "I measure boots, not dreams." Local poets scribble verses mocking noblemen who take 3 steps forward and fall back 5. You follow the path further into northern towns where practicality wins out and shoe tips get shorter. In Scotland, they never really take off, something about climbing hills in banana-shaped shoes proving unpopular. Back in France, the craze is slowing slightly. The pointy toe, once a radical act, now faces fatigue. You see it in the faces of weary servants polishing curled leather at dawn, in the sighs of overburdened couriers trying to pack 2 pairs into a travel trunk. Still, in the countryside, the trend has legs, literally. In rural towns, poulens become heirlooms, passed down, repaired. You spot a young boy slipping on his grandfather's ceremonial shoes for a harvest dance. The tips trail behind him like little dragon tails, and he beams with pride. Because at this point, poulains are more than just footwear. They're tradition, their satire, their defiance, their identity stitched in cord and soul. And as you make your way back toward the palace gates, past performers, priests, and peasants, you feel it in your own steps, the strange human urge to make the ordinary ridiculous. You slip quietly back into the ornate halls of Charles V's court, where velvet curtains flutter like whispers and courtiers lounge like cats draped in excess. The atmosphere is thick with rosewater and quiet scandal, and something is shifting. You don't see it at first. The poulains are still here, curling like question marks across marble floors. But there's a new tension in the air, an awareness that the king is losing patience with the kingdom's latest footwear obsession. Mm-hmm. Rumors swirl like bees around jam. The king's physician, a solemn man with eyebrows like brush bristles, has presented a formal concern. Long-toed shoes, he claims, are causing posture problems. Men are leaning forward when they walk. Women are twisting their ankles. A courtier even sprained his wrist attempting to remove his poulens in a hurry after knocking over a soup tureen. But that's not the worst of it. A bishop, stern and sun-spotted, has delivered a sermon so blistering, so full of righteous fire, that even the queen's ladies stopped lacing their shoes mid-thread. These devilish extensions, he intones, make men into beasts and women into temptresses. Our steps must follow Christ, not curl into vanity. The line draws applause from the pious and yawns from the fashionable. Still, it makes the rounds. Satirical illustrations spring up. Little woodcuts of Satan fitting a duke with flamboyant poulains, or death itself tripping a nobleman with his own footwear. And then there's the court jester. You spot him lounging near a pillar, his own poulains, absurdly long, painted like striped snakes. He quips, "I've seen better posture in boiled eels." The room erupts in laughter, but the king does not smile. You can feel it now. The air tightening, the mood souring. What began as a sartorial game is becoming a royal headache. Charles V, a man known for his intellect and obsession with order, begins consulting advisors, not about wars or taxes, but shoes. You watch them gather, hunched over diagrams like generals studying a battle map. One minister suggests an outright ban. Another recommends regulated toe lengths according to rank. 3 inches for merchants, he says, tapping the scroll. 5 for barons, unlimited for the king. Historians still argue whether Charles's motivations were moral, medical, or simply aesthetic. But what's clear is this: he was done with the chaos. The proclamation arrives like a cold slap. Royal scribes pen it in thick black ink. Messengers ride out with sealed scrolls. Town criers lift their voices in every square. Let it be known, His Majesty Charles V hereby forbids the wearing, making, or importing of pointed shoes exceeding 2 inches past the toe. Offenders shall be fined and their shoes seized. Gasps ripple through the land. You imagine a noblewoman pausing mid-lace, aghast, a cobbler dropping his tools in despair, a teenage boy trying to measure his planes with a carrot and hoping it's close enough. Enforcement begins swiftly. Shoe inspectors, yes, actual royal shoe inspectors, are appointed in major cities. You trail one through the streets of Lyon. He carries a stick notched with toe-length measurements and taps it against every shoe he passes. Some townspeople hide their shoes, others flaunt them. One man shouts, measure my feet and be damned, before tripping over a cabbage. Some simply adapt. Shoemakers get clever. They start designing shoes with concealed extensions, hidden compartments, removable tips, or painted toes that blend into the street to create an optical illusion. One particularly crafty artisan markets a model called Le Mirage. But the king is not amused. Punishments vary. First time offenders pay fines or have their shoes trimmed publicly. You attend one such trimming and witness a man weeping softly as a royal cobbler slices the ends off his beloved poulaines, the way one might de-antler a stag. For repeat offenders, jail time is possible. Not for long, but enough to make a point. In the countryside, the news travels slower and is greeted with shrugs. A farmer in Gascony hears the ban and mutters, "We've always worn boots anyway." But in cities, especially Paris, the cultural shift is loud and chaotic. Fashion pivots. Rounded toes make a comeback. The wealthy adopt slippers adorned with embroidery, focusing now on color rather than shape. A duchess shows off her new moss green shoes with garnet clasps and declares, "Toes are for peasants." The room nods in agreement, but you sense nostalgia hanging in the air. You pass a young artist painting a portrait. On the floor beside him are his discarded poulaines, their tips curling like wilted petals. He paints them into the background, a quiet protest, a relic of a banned era. Meanwhile, black markets bloom. You visit a cellar in Avignon where illegal poulaines are sold like contraband. They're hidden in barrels behind false walls, wrapped in straw like wine bottles. You try one on and the seller winks. Just don't wear them near the palace. But it's not all suppression. Some people are relieved. One elderly washerwoman tells you, "Now I won't trip on any more idiot nobles at the fountain." She cackles and tosses a sock into her basket. The king's court shifts. Shoes get simpler. Robes lengthen. Jewelry grows more elaborate, as if nobility must channel their peacock instincts elsewhere. Fashion doesn't disappear, it mutates. And yet, beneath the quiet compliance, you feel it. A cultural scar. People talk about poulaines the way you talk about an old lover, with a mix of fondness, embarrassment, and maybe a twinge of longing. You overhear a street musician singing a ballad. "Once I walked the lanes in lace with shoes that kissed the floor with grace. Now I walk in round-toed shame, but dream of points that sang my name." The song ends and a single coin lands in his cap. You leave the square feeling the weight of the ban, not just in leather, but in spirit. The dust settles. You wander the calmer streets of Paris a few weeks later, and the mood has shifted noticeably. There are fewer arguments in taverns, fewer tripping nobles clutching lampposts, and a little less drama at the cobbler's shop, though not by much. With the long pointed shoes tucked away like forbidden pastries, society begins to find its footing again, figuratively and literally. The clergy breathe easier, the physicians offer smug nods, and the shoemakers grumble into their aprons. The kingdom adapts because that's what kingdoms do. But there's still a lingering curiosity in the air. Why had Pointy's shoes mattered so much? Why did people cling to them like secrets? You stop at a quiet library tucked into the edge of a monastery, and there, amongst dusty ledgers and illuminated scrolls, you find clues to something deeper, something older. The poulaines weren't just ridiculous fashion, they were symbols. Long shoes, according to some monks' marginalia, had once conveyed fertility, masculine energy, even spiritual virility. Some even believed they aligned with ley lines or channeled divine balance through the body, though historians still argue whether these beliefs were widespread or simply written by a particularly shoe-obsessed scribe with a flair for mysticism. In certain parts of Burgundy, you learn, these elongated shoes had been considered protection charms. A mother might sew a tiny poulain onto her infant's blanket to ward off evil spirits. There's even a tale of a minor noble who claimed his shoes helped him predict storms as they tingled before a thunderclap, a medieval foot-based weather app essentially. But the most quietly fascinating shift comes not from superstition, but from design. With the banning of poulains, French fashion begins a strange inward turn. Shoes become a canvas not for shape, but for meaning. You trail a young shoemaker in Rouen who's begun experimenting with velvet appliques. One pair he makes bears tiny stitch fleur-de-lis. Another depicts scenes from the book of Genesis in gold thread. He explains, "If I can't show off the toes, I'll show off the soul." You smirk. Pun intended, surely. Elsewhere, sumptuary laws tighten. It's not just pointy shoes anymore. New edicts limit the kinds of fabrics peasants may wear, the number of buttons permitted on a nobleman's cloak, even the acceptable height of a lady's hennin. One baroness writes bitterly to her sister, "They've shortened our shoes and now shrink our dignity." You picture the royal court like a giant sewing machine, humming with regulation. Tailors whisper about loopholes, buttons shaped like berries, silk smuggled through monasteries, boots with heel compartments for hiding spices or secrets. Yet there are those who celebrate this simplification. Philosophers and moralists claim France is regaining its virtue. They insist the Poulain era was decadent, distracting, dangerous. A famous poem emerges. Gone the curling devil's fang, now the foot walks plain and strong. Fashion bends, but once again, to reason's soft and steady song. Of course, there are detractors too. A group of young nobles stage a miniature protest by hosting a backward banquet. Each guest must arrive wearing their most exaggerated shoes on their hands. They slink into the hall, clapping toe-to-toe, giggling as they sip wine through pinky fingers curled like crescent moons. The crown doesn't punish them, too much laughter from the queen, but it makes one thing clear. This isn't a trend anymore. It's policy. And so the Poulain becomes history. But history doesn't disappear quietly. It lingers in basements and ballads, in that oddly shaped space in old wardrobes where long shoes once nestled. Years pass. Charles V ages. His son, the future Charles VI, watches this fashion cycle with wide eyes. And though he'll face challenges far greater than footwear, madness, wars, betrayal, you wonder if he ever looked at his father's portrait and thought, what was the big deal with the shoes? Across the channel, meanwhile, England takes note. They had flirted with poulains too. After all, fashion traveled quickly, quicker than laws. But while France banned the pointy menace, England leaned in. Under Richard II and his successors, the shoes actually got longer. Nobles walked with sticks just to manage their absurdly extended toes. In one ridiculous case, an English knight allegedly fastened his shoes to his leggings with chains to keep them from flopping. And here's the twist. It's possible the French ban actually made poulains more fashionable in England. Scarcity breeding desire, rebellion breeding trend. Historians still argue whether Charles's prohibition ended the craze or simply internationalized it. You pause in a small gallery tucked beside the Seine. There, under glass, lies a preserved pair of poulains, sleek, black, beautifully curled, like a quill writing the word "Y" across the floor. A placard reads, "Recovered from a noble's estate, 1378, likely hidden from royal confiscation." You lean closer, and for a moment it's like they're whispering, not in rebellion, not in protest, just a quiet, pointed memory of a time when even your feet tried to reach for the future. By now you're beginning to understand that fashion, especially in medieval France, is never just fashion. It's politics in silk, theology in leather, ego in embroidery. And nowhere does that come through more clearly than in the aftermath of the Poulain ban, when court fashion takes a hard turn. Downward. With pointy shoes now thoroughly outlawed and mocked, French nobility finds itself in a style crisis. What now? What shape of shoe says, "I still matter"? You observe courtiers wobbling through marble corridors in shoes that now end bluntly, as if someone just sawed them flat. It looks awkward at first, but soon a new shape catches on. The duckbill. The duckbill shoe is just what it sounds like. Wide, flat, and unapologetically clumsy looking, it flattens the silhouette and exaggerates width rather than length. And though it starts practical, one local cobbler calls it a shoe you can actually walk in, it doesn't take long before it too becomes a platform for excess. Soon noblemen are commissioning duckbills so wide they can barely fit through doorways. Some even insert metal reinforcements to preserve their majestic splay. One noble's shoes are rumored to be nearly 10 inches across, and he walks with a sideways shuffle that resembles a goose preparing for takeoff. Meanwhile, tailors now pivot to elevate everything above the ankle. Robes get longer, tunics get puffier. Headwear becomes so elaborate it requires scaffolding. You see one lady in waiting whose hat is rumored to be stitched with strands of unicorn hair. More likely, goat, and a good story. In this new chapter of fashion, shoes fade slightly from the spotlight, but their ghosts linger. People still whisper about Poulains like they were a scandalous cousin, exciting, embarrassing, and maybe slightly magical. Children tie ribbons to their slippers to mimic the old pointed silhouette in secret games. Servants joke about invisible shoes at banquets. "Careful where you step, monsieur. I believe your toes are 3 feet ahead." It's in this moment that satire really blooms. Pamphlets start circulating, gently mocking poems, illustrations of nobles tangled in their own shoes, cartoons of the devil laughing as he polishes a pair of golden poulains. These aren't printed en masse yet. Gutenberg is still about a century away, but hand-copied jokes spread fast, especially when they target the elite. One particularly biting cartoon shows a king being dragged to hell by a pair of pointy shoes, while a monk waves from above with a flat sandal. It's crude, but it sticks. You see it reappear in different monasteries, slightly altered each time. A halo here, a longer shoe there, perhaps even a tiny frog added for flair. Some monasteries even include a subtle jab in their architecture, stone carvings of angels stepping on devilish shoes, saints wearing rounded sandals, sinners tumbling in curved boots. Whether intentional or the work of mischievous masons, it's hard to say. Historians still argue whether this was coordinated commentary or just the artistic equivalent of medieval graffiti. And yet, while France steps gingerly into new fashion, something else is brewing in the background. Nationalism. With the ban on Poulain, the crown quietly reinforces what it means to be properly French. Clothing laws become tools for identity. French shoes should be French in shape. Foreign affectations are discouraged. Nobles who dare wear Italian or German styles are gently reprimanded, or not so gently exiled from court events. You overhear a steward muttering, "Better barefoot than Burgundian," which is hilarious, of course, because the original Poulain craze came from Burgundy. The contradiction doesn't bother anyone too much. Fashion's memory is short. What matters is the message. French dignity is clean, upright, symmetrical. No floppy extremities, no devil toes. As this new cultural mood sets in, you start noticing changes in art as well. Paintings that once glorified length, flowing fabrics, endless scrolls, infinite shoes, now prefer balanced proportions. Even manuscript margins grow calmer. A scribe in Tours notes, "It is no longer necessary to elongate the limbs of saints. Modesty guides the quill now." Still, there's tension. A few nobles miss the flamboyance. Some express it with oversized cups. Others invest in perfume or pocket alchemy sets, miniature vials, and charms hidden in coat linings. A new kind of fashion emerges. Secret flair. Intrigue tucked into the folds of sobriety. And you, walking through this silent shift, feel like you're watching a theater crew change sets behind a curtain that's never quite closed. It's subtle, but total. A kingdom redefines itself, one hemline at a time. By now, decades have passed. Charles V has died. His son, Charles VI, now rules, a man destined for tragedy. Though tonight, in this slow dreamscape, we won't dwell on that. He inherits not just a kingdom, but a fashion culture already humming with transformation. At one of his early court events, a French ambassador from Avignon is said to have remarked, "The shoes are sensible. The minds may follow." You smile. That's optimistic, and entirely wrong. Still, for one brief moment in France, fashion obeys. And for better or worse, the shoes don't point anywhere but forward. The 15th century winds on like a slow-moving tapestry, threads of court intrigue and peasant life weaving together beneath the watchful gaze of a changing Europe. And here you find yourself stepping cautiously into a world where the legacy of the band Poulain still hums beneath every polished cobblestone and sewn seam. The duckbill shoes may have taken center stage, but other footwear stories are unfolding, subtle, often overlooked, yet utterly charming in their own right. In the bustling streets of Paris, you notice the emergence of practical shoes worn by commoners, sturdy, round-toed leather boots designed for long walks and muddy markets. They lack the aristocratic flourish, sure, but these shoes tell a story too, of people who don't have the luxury to worry about pointiness, only durability. Wicker baskets bump against each other as vendors shuffle along, the smell of fresh bread mingling with the crisp scent of leather and horse dung. It's a world where every shoe has a purpose and every step carries a tale. Meanwhile, the nobility continue their quiet fashion battles. With the Poulain's length cut down, attention turns to the height of shoes. Enter the Chopins, a Venetian invention that soon finds favor in France. These are platform shoes so high they practically make walking a performance art. Ladies totter like graceful herons, balancing on wooden stilts beneath their gowns. Gentlemen sport elevated boots, their heels clicking authoritatively on palace floors. One particularly flamboyant duke is rumored to have had Chopin so high he needed a servant to help him climb stairs. It's a striking contrast to the sober shoes Charles V tried to impose, and historians still debate whether this was subtle defiance or mere fashion evolution. Perhaps both. At the same time, shoes begin to symbolize social rank with increasing precision. You see records of sumptuary laws, those age-old rules that dictate who can wear what. A peasant caught sporting silk-lined boots risks fines, while nobles must ensure their shoes aren't too modest, lest they appear poor or politically weak. Shoes become a language, a secret code that everyone understands, but only a few can speak fluently. In quiet corners of monasteries, monks glance down at their plain sandals, grateful for simplicity, yet sometimes entertained by rumors of fashionable follies at court. They whisper about a mysterious shoe tax, rumored to have been levied on noble footwear, a way to curb extravagance without saying so directly. Though there's no solid proof, it adds flavor to the sleepy rumor mill. And as you imagine the lives behind these shoes, you begin to appreciate their deeper meanings. Shoes protect, yes, but they also project. They carry history, status, and personality, all wrapped in leather and thread. The transformation from pointy poulains to sturdy boots and towering chopines isn't just about comfort or law, it's about identity. You find yourself wondering about the people who made these shoes, the cobblers in cramped workshops shaping leather with worn hands, the servants who polished and repaired, the children who dreamt of shoes they might never wear. Each pair a small chapter in the vast story of medieval life. Through all these shifts, you feel the pulse of change, a slow march from flamboyance to function, from chaos to order, from pointed whimsy to grounded reality. Yet beneath it all, the spirit of the poulain lingers like a ghost, a reminder that fashion is never just about shoes. Historians still argue whether the bane truly curbed extravagance or merely pushed it into new, more subtle forms. Perhaps you muse, it did both. The dawn of the 16th century brings fresh winds and fresher shoes as the Renaissance sweeps across Europe like a slow but unstoppable tide. You find yourself strolling through the courtyards of Florence and the chateau of the Loire Valley, where fashion has taken on a new personality, more refined, more measured, yet still delightfully indulgent. Gone are the long, flapping points of the poulain, but the echoes remain, transformed into subtle embellishments and daring new silhouettes. Here, shoes start to resemble little works of art, stitched with embroidery, adorned with jewels, and painted with vivid dyes. The delicate scent of saffron and lavender lingers in the air as courtiers parade in velvet slippers and satin pumps, their toes elegantly squared off rather than pointed. The change reflects a broader shift, a growing appreciation for harmony, proportion, and classical ideals that define the Renaissance spirit. Meanwhile, across the Channel in England, Tudor fashions dictate their own rules. You imagine the bustling London streets filled with merchants, apprentices, and noblemen, all carefully stepping in their distinctive footwear. The notorious duck-bill shoes appear briefly, a nod to the poulain's legacy, but English modesty tames their size. The monarch himself, Henry VIII, favors wide, padded shoes that speak of power rather than frivolity. You recall tales of royal proclamations aimed at controlling shoe extravagance, similar in spirit to Charles V's earlier ban, but adapted to local tastes. These laws serve not only to regulate fashion, but also to reinforce social hierarchy. A noble shoe must be grand, but not vulgar. A commoner's, practical, but never too plain. Shoes become a delicate balance between expression and restraint, a visual dance on the thin line of etiquette. In quieter corners of the continent, you hear whispers of unusual footwear, embroidered slippers from Ottoman lands, wooden clogs from the Netherlands, and delicate silk shoes favored by Japanese courtiers. Each tells its own story, a small piece of the vast mosaic of global fashion history. One curious detail catches your attention: the practice of shoe shining, an art in its own right. You picture a sleepy alley in Venice where a cobbler carefully polishes a pair of leather boots by candlelight, the glow of shell gold faintly flickering on the worn surfaces. The act is both practical and ceremonial, a quiet ritual that bridges the gap between wearer and maker. Historians still argue whether the Renaissance truly marked a break from medieval excess or simply shifted the battleground of fashion into new, subtler territories. Either way, the humble shoe remains at the heart of the story, a steadfast companion through centuries of change. And as you let the image of embroidered slippers and polished boots fade softly, you realize that fashion is less about rules and more about stories. Stories whispered in leather and thread, carried quietly from one generation to the next. By the late 16th and early 17th centuries, shoes have firmly stepped into the spotlight of European courts, reflecting the growing influence of absolutism and the theatrical spectacle of monarchy. You picture yourself in the grand halls of Versailles, where Louis XIV, the Sun King, famously uses footwear as a tool of power and pageantry. His red heeled shoes aren't just fashion statements, they are declarations of status, wrapped in velvet and gilt, sparkling under the glow of countless chandeliers. The air is thick with the scent of rose water and polished leather as courtiers vie for the king's favor, their shoes clicking rhythmically on marble floors. These shoes are no longer just coverings for feet, they are symbols of authority and perhaps a subtle weapon in the endless game of court intrigue. The height of the heels, the brightness of the colors, and the intricate bows all communicate a careful message about rank and privilege. Meanwhile, in quieter villages beyond the royal gaze, life moves at a gentler pace. Peasants and artisans wear sturdy leather or wooden clogs, practical and worn, scuffed from years of labor. You imagine the simple joy of slipping off these shoes after a long day, the soft sigh of relief as tired feet meet cool earth. These humble shoes carry the weight of countless stories of harvests, festivals, and everyday resilience. Interestingly, this era also witnesses a burgeoning shoe industry, with shoemakers and cobblers becoming respected craftsmen. You hear the faint hammering of nails and the soft scrape of knives shaping soles in workshops lit by flickering oil lamps. Shoes become more personalized, fitted carefully to each wearer, with subtle distinctions that hint at profession or social standing. The Pompeys of the Renaissance evolve into the more refined pantoufles and mules that promise comfort without sacrificing style. One quirky note, the infamous poulain never quite vanishes from the fringes of fashion, sometimes revived in jest or as a bold statement by the daring. There are tales of young nobles wearing exaggerated points to mock the past or defy court norms, tiny rebellions played out one shoe at a time. Historians still debate whether these revivals were sincere fashion choices or elaborate pranks in the labyrinth of court politics. And as you feel the soft rustle of silk and leather mingle with distant laughter and whispered secrets, you realize that shoes are more than just footwear. They are threads in the fabric of history, stepping lightly through centuries, carrying both the weight of tradition and the freedom of expression. So, as your own feet find comfort beneath warm blankets, you let these stories fade gently into the night, the quiet click of imaginary heels, a soothing lullaby for your mind. The day's fashions soften as twilight deepens, and the once bold shapes of shoes now melt into memory's gentle embrace. You feel the warmth of worn leather and the faint glimmer of gilded thread dissolve into a quiet hush. Each step you imagined, from the towering points of the medieval court to the polished elegance of the Sun King's ballroom, now settles like a soft sigh on your skin. There is a calm in knowing that even the most elaborate shoes, with their pointed toes and whispered rumors, were once as fleeting as the fading light. Yet their stories linger, delicate footprints on the parchment of time, comforting and strange. You are part of this slow dance, a link in the long chain of feet that have walked before, each carrying dreams, hopes, and a touch of whimsy. So let your breath slow and your mind drift, wrapped in the gentle folds of history's softest shoes. Tonight, may you walk softly between worlds where past and present meet, and sleep arrives like a well loved slipper, warm and waiting. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.